Hi, this is Paul. The Doug Wilson, Rod Dreher thing continues to sort of, I guess, get beat up by by Doug Wilson and his crew. I guess they're a little defensive about the Boniface option, and there to sort of defend themselves against Rod Dreher, seen in some ways sort of as a frenemy. So I just did a little bit more Googling and looking around at things. And some of you wanted a little bit more of this. And well, let's start with this video. And there's a lot more to talk about.
Work to some absurd position, and is far more effective than a learned tome that destroys the position but which nobody reads. For example, as the meme goes, when a 6-year-old is transitioning, it is kind of like meeting someone with a vegan cat. We all know who is actually making the decisions.
Now, as usual, the best line is there in the teaser, and that's true here too. Dreher calls him a meme lord, and I think that's right. And I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily. I mean, remember, this guy toured with Christopher Hitchens. And became friends with Christopher Hitchens. I think Hitchens, even though they disagreed tremendously over their beliefs, Hitchens just had to respect this guy's his quick wit. He is a meme lord. He can meme things, better and faster than most. Now, so he's going to get into that a little bit in this video.
Brief review of Andrew Isker's book, The Boniface Option. After that, I'm going to interact a bit more with Rod Dreher's review of it, along with some observations about Dreher's odd and erratic behavior since his review was published. And then
Now, this is interesting. And is it unfair to sort of want to evaluate someone from, let's say, behind the scenes? In this case, probably not, because with respect to, if you just do any Googling about Doug Wilson and Moscow, Idaho, there's a lot of questions about how they've handled sexual abuse scandals. And of course, for Dreher, that's a very touchy thing given his history with the Roman Catholic Church. But Wilson's going to sort of get personal with Dreher here, even as he continues to invite him, which probably is going to sort of work in different ways, because who really wants to go and visit the guy who put his aimed his internet cannon at you?
I'm going to reveal a little bit of the thinking behind the public invitation that both I and Jared Longshore extended to Dreher, an offer that...
Now, that Jared Longshore is another video that Algo just set up for me. We're actually going to look at this video because it gets into more of where Wilson is coming from, which I didn't really know a lot of. And but this video where basically Jared Longshore says that he moved to Moscow, Idaho to take a job there at New St. Andrews, and it's a great town, and it's a great way of life, and the critics don't know what they're talking about, yada, yada, yada. So I did a little bit more looking around at stuff, and I found this 2019 article from Religious News Service. Now, Religious News Service has sort of been increasingly trending left, but it's a fairly sympathetic, at least compared to a lot of what else is out there on the internet, fairly sympathetic take on Moscow, Idaho. And at least in 2019, Wilson's church was about 900 and a church plant was about 400. I don't know if that's the same. If you know, just make a comment down in the comment section. So we're not talking about a huge number of people. I also did a little checking. He's ordained. I wondered if they were non-denominational. They actually are in a denomination, the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches, which I don't know a lot about. I'll probably have to go to Ready to Harvest for a little bit of background on this, but it's a very new denomination. The Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches, formerly the Confederation of Reformed Evangelical Churches, was founded in 1998 as a body of churches that holds to Reformed Calvinist theology. Member churches include those from Presbyterian Reformed and Reformed Baptist backgrounds. It's interesting because the denomination can sort of go either way on infant baptism. They've got some churches in some different places in the world. They have a whole list they sort of have a menu option here in terms of what the churches can pick from, it looks like. And yeah, and then notable members, Peter Leithart is in there. And I thought, now, if you know anything about Peter Leithart, he's beloved by some really some friends of mine who really love what he does. And I thought, Peter Leithart and Doug Wilson are in the same denomination. Wow. I'm going to have to think more about that. What on earth does that mean? Now, again, some of you might know, and so just put it in the comments section. He was born in 53. Which means he's 70 years old. About been around a while. Of course, he did his thing with Christopher Hitchens for a while. Have been gotten hot water over discussions on slavery, federal vision. So a bunch of these sorts of things. Let's listen to a little bit more of his. And again, what he's doing here is where he, I think, just really grabs attention in a place like YouTube, because he's so sharp and he's so quick and he just flings these memes around so fast, and he points to the most dramatic elements that are out there to prove his point that things have to change, and there's no such thing as extremism in the mission to make America Christian again, and we'll talk about that. A lot of the Winsome wars I look at as sort of, remember in Toy Story when, I know, they got to go on a mission and Mr. Potato Head's going on a mission and Mrs. Potato Head says, "Bring your angry eyes," and she packs his angry eyes so he can. And, a lot of the Winsome wars are sort of like that. And I just certainly don't want to prod anybody to do something they shouldn't do. But so much of this stuff seems to me to be sort of posturing. I can be angrier than you. I can be more outraged than you. I can be more outrageous on the internet than you. And Doug Wilson is just, I mean, his power of the pen is just really amazing. And so I could see, very few people wanting to just sort of go up against this guy and debate him.
That invited him to come to Moscow and see some things for himself. In short, we will begin with the public.
Now, it also struck me as ironic that now here in the 2020s, someone from a town named Moscow is inviting critics to come and see their new way of life. Yeah, that was kind of popular 100 years ago. That didn't go so well. So, and my point, again, I don't know what's going on up there. And I quite frankly, I imagine it's just a bunch of conservative Christians who are, especially people who have moved there, who are trying really hard to work out that vision. And I'm sure the vast majority of them are wonderful people. I have known conservative Christians that, and right away some people are going to jump on this about women and treatment of women. I've known some conservative Christians that you would very much want to be married to this person because they treat their women very, very well. And I've known some very progressive Christians who treat their wives like dirt, and vice versa. So, I don't know how often the narrative necessarily lines up with their capacity to treat people well in real life. I know that's often people tend to make a lot of that, but anyway. So yeah, it is kind of funny that Moscow was inviting critics over to see in this case, their old new way of life, instead of sort of going to see the new Bolshevik utopia.
Public stuff, and then move gradually into some inside baseball stuff. And you, because you are premium members, get to read all of it. Just kidding. There are no premium members. But at least you get to act like premium members. Also, I was reliably informed at church this last Sunday that I had neglected to select a book of the month for either August or September. That this came as a surprise to me should give you some indication of how...
And again, if you listen to the long... What's the guy's name? No, not him. Longshore. I've got absolutely no question that Doug Wilson in real life seems like a really fun guy to hang along with. Again, remember, him and Christopher Hitchens basically went on the road together and had a great time. So often we sort of stereotype people. I mean, I did a video a little while ago about a former colleague of mine who I was in the classes for 7 years, and my parents knew him because he's a little younger than my parents, and he was in New Jersey in an early church, and they knew him. And lo and behold, 48 years ago, he was molesting little girls and, in fact, murdered at least one of them. And, none of us ever knew that. And I don't think he was anywhere. In fact, I know he wasn't. I would imagine Doug Wilson's a lot more fun to hang around with than that guy was. Like, the guy was actually kind of a boring person. But people loved him, and they loved him as a pastor. And, the church, his last church that he was at here, just at the Fairfield CRC, I mean, that story is just, it's just inconceivable. So, again, I'm saying this because what happens on the internet is we create these straw men, and it flattens the complexity of human beings, because human beings are like this. Human beings are astoundingly programmable in that, and their programming can be extremely idiosyncratic. This guy could have the best marriage and treat his wife like an absolute princess, and have theology that, as in the words of some blogs, is rapey or something like that. So this is the way people are. And I don't know why on the internet we can't just admit people are like this. They're complex. They have ideas. They might be good ideas. They might be bad ideas. This is how people are. And so that's why, combat the ideas. Treat the people like image bearers.
Abandoned I've become to the thinking of great thoughts, or what some might call wool gathering. Either way, I'm tagging this post as a book review, and this book is my September selection for the Book of the Month slot. Not that it needs my help. We are a few weeks after the book's release, and it is still selling quite briskly on.
Maybe, I don't know, is it out by his press? I should probably do my homework. So when I got my Kindle Scribe, I got a trial of Kindle Unlimited, and apparently this book is in Kindle Unlimited, which sort of surprised me, because most of the time when I've looked at Kindle Unlimited in the past, it didn't seem to ever have any books that I wanted to take a look at, but this one has one. So I'm looking for the published by Gab AI Inc., Clark Summit, Pennsylvania. So then I go to, gab.com. That's a social media network. So I'm sure you internet people out there will know what this is. I just thought there's a degree of irony that, in some ways, this is what's happening, which is so funny in the world to me, when you sort of have these hidebound conservatives that, now I'm looking like the Joker here. I think Grimm's gonna grab that one. Gab AI Inc. Leaving the contemporary world behind, not so easy. So yeah, trash world. So anyway, on with the show.
On Amazon, the Boniface option. Let us begin with the bottom line. This is a good book, and if you
okay.
you read Dreher's review of it, and thus had your expectations lowered, and then came back and read this book anyway, you would count it as a really good book.
I'll have to take a little bit more of a look at it tomorrow while I'm in puppy prison, probably.
Andrew Isker writes vigorously and well, and for the most part, he knows who the enemy is. He knows what the outrages are, and he's willing to tag the outrages with appropriate names.
Oh, so we're going to do outrage. All right.
This really is trash world, and the globo-homo-industrial complex really is a threat to us all.
Part of what's interesting, too, about this sort of approach is it's so totalizing. I mean, he keeps talking about this, this hellscape we're living in, and it's like, well, if it's a hellscape, why does your 1,500 or 2,000 people over in this little corner of Idaho in this college town, for the most part, get to do what you want to do? That doesn't sound like tyranny to me. Now, maybe it's not everything that you would want, but anyway.
He understands the comprehensive nature of the threat and sees that we are under a full court press. If we are going to run an offense...
And again, it's always, and this is part of the pattern, and Dreher does this too. I mean, like I said in the last video, sometimes I read, if I'm reading Dreher too much, it's like, I got to shut this and put this away and go look at the puppy. And I'm not trying to be Pollyannish here, but now he's 70, I'm 60. You live long enough, and you just keep watching people hit that button. The the chicken little button. And again, that isn't to dismiss evils in the world today, but okay, though the wrong seems off so strong, he is the ruler yet. This is my father's world. There's an old song.
At all, we have to run one that takes into account the fact that we are under a full court press. The weak parts of the book are those few places where he tags certain things as part of Trash World that, in my view, aren't necessarily part of it at all.
But that's part of that's part of what happens with this. Is again, it's just everything is just totalizing. It's like, yeah, but not always.
E.g., suburbia, seed oils, industrial food production, and in not cautioning enough against the globo-homo narcissism that our modern fitness mirrors tend to reflect. But these distractions...
Right there. What he just did right there. I mean, it's just incredibly effective.
Homo narcissism that our modern fitness mirrors tend to reflect.
I mean, he talks so fast and the memes come so fast, it's like, whoop, right? Just right under the filters. I mean, the guy should be, flying attack aircraft. It's just like right under the radar and deploy those bombs before you even know what's going on.
But these distractions are easily forgiven, given the overall point of the book and the glaring abominations Isker spends the bulk of his time targeting. The strength of the book, and the thing that put Rod Dreher off his feed, was that Isker treats abominations as though they actually are abominable.
Okay, now, another dynamic that happens here, which is what amazes me in watching a lot of this media, it's that again, it's almost like I want my outrage. Would you please pour my bowl of outrage cereal, my outrage O's this morning, and cover it with the blood of unborn children so that I can be energized in my outrage. And well, okay, what are you going to do with all this energy? Are you just going to sit here and be outraged? And what is that going to do with the rest of your relationships? What is that going to do with your life? What is that going to do to your body? And again, it isn't to say that there aren't things to be outraged about, but if you are outraged, it should result in some action which hopefully will be about more than just self-indulgent self-expression and actual being able to make progress in an enormously large system towards a specific end. And generally speaking, if you look at, let's think about something like the civil rights movement in the middle of the 20th century. If you look at how actually it got effective by the 50s and 60s, it was decades of patient, often legal work, very disciplined work. Now, a bowl of outrage cereal is usually just sort of gets the juices going in front of the screens. And I've done that plenty. And then I take my outrage over to, then I find people who aren't as outraged as I am. And then you sort of light your hair on fire. You can see how well that works. And then they just look at you, and then maybe you just have a fight. So then you feel sort of self-justified in your outrageousness. That isn't necessarily terribly spiritually healthy. Self-righteousness is a very dangerous thing. Or you just gather around with other people who are outraged about the same thing. So then you and yours can be together and just be outraged together. And there you're having your outrage party. Okay. But the things that you're outraged about, what exactly is your plan on doing that? And the fact that here's an inconvenient little tidbit for those who live off the fuel of outrage. You're probably not your smartest self when you're hitting that outrage button. You're just reacting. And that's not different from being angry about something. I mean, if you're angry about something, it's just one tick short of panic, which is usually complete mindlessness. So, okay. But and I think the Boniface option, what he wants to do is offer a blueprint. Great. So wonderful. I'll take a look at your blueprint. My guess is it kind of looks exactly what I would imagine it would look like, which is kind of conservative evangelicalism, family values, all of which is great. So, and, others aren't going to be able to participate in it because for one reason or another they checked out of there, or they had a grievance against it, or they had something in their life that meant that they couldn't sort of hit certain standards, and so they couldn't be welcome in the community, what have you. But I don't begrudge the 1,500 or 2,000 people in the corner of Idaho. In fact, when I was on vacation a couple of years ago, I noticed that I was doing a lot of driving in that area because my wife and I love to go on long trips during our vacation. We just sit in the car and talk and listen to audiobooks. And the American West has just so much beauty. And we're going to go, like, I was really tempted to kind of duck through Moscow, Idaho and say, well, you want to take a look at what this town with a kind of reformed cult looks like, but I didn't. But I partly just expected that it wouldn't look any different. And then I thought it'd be more fun to go through on a Sunday, but then I'd have to see. I don't know if I'd get my wife into that church. So anyway,
he sees them for what they are and gives them the treatment. Quote, if you had ever wondered how the Benedict option would have been if its author were a late millennial Calvinist meme lord of Moscow, Idaho, well, now you have your answer. Rod Dreher reviewing the Boniface option. But there are callings.
That's a good line.
Worse than being a meme lord. When the sovereignty of God determines that.
And again, he is a meme lord, and I mean that in the best possible sense. He is as potent a memer as you will find. And just read his blog or listen to these little videos, and he doesn't tend to be as impressive the longer the video gets, though, and we'll get there.
We are to live in a time that is bent like ours, and someone has invented memes, and it is discovered that the left can't meme. The power of memes is kind of like discovering that one little aperture in the Death Star. Or, to elevate our discourse somewhat, it is like discovering that one unprotected spot on Smaug's underbelly. I've seen many occasions where a meme does short work to some absurd position, and it is far more effective than a learned tome that destroys the position, but which nobody reads. For example,
and he's right, and it's very, very well said.
As the meme goes, when a 6-year-old is transitioning, it is kind of like meeting someone with a vegan cat. We all know who is actually making the decisions.
And that is a genius meme. That is just a genius meme. I was going to list a whole bunch of other memes that are definitely sort of B-level. They don't have the same whiz or whoosh as that meme. Boy, Grizz is going to eat up this video.
The strength of Isker's writing is in his short descriptions. Somebody must have given him a pithy helmet for his birthday. Quote, spiritually homosexual, whether or not they can make you actually homosexual. Quote,
that one is pretty interesting, pretty good. That one's quite good.
Quote, assimilate them into the Borg collective.
That's not original at all. I've been using that forever since.
Quote, terabytes of porn while they wait for the next Marvel movie to come out.
Yeah.
Quote, the bug man is trained to deny the reality you show him. Quote,
pretty good.
Quote, he is willing to submit to the idea that 350-pound lingerie models are beautiful, that men can become women, and so forth. Quote,
now, about large women, I have a story. I've told this story before. I'm an old man. I get to repeat myself. Cultures are very different about beauty. African-American culture in America, very different about beauty. When I was a missionary in the Dominican Republic, we had a woman who worked in our home, and she was a lovely young woman, and she was very thin. And I remember she'd always complaining to my wife about how she's too thin. Why? Because Dominican men liked their women thick. And it was interesting because we'd have these North American work crews come down, and the skinny women, the skinny, pretty women in North America would come down and get no attention from the Dominican men. But the larger North American women came down and they got all sorts of attention, and they noticed it and they thought, hey, how about this? Why not? Why not be appreciated for my size in this place? So, That's a very culture-laden thing.
The fake and gay global homo-cinematic universe. Quote, there's a
That's not so funny.
direct line from Rosie the Riveter to a pink-haired, septum-pierced, androgynous orc teaching
I don't think that's even true.
your preschooler about anal sex and, quote, being a replaceable wage slave in a cubicle under the thumb of H.R. Harridans.
And that's not necessarily even right wing.
Someone like Rod Dreher complains that such statements are the work of an angry and bitter young man, instead of colorful descriptions coming from an astute journalist with eyes in his head.
Well, it was Dreher that called him a meme lord, which was pretty good.
Overstatement? There are a bunch of readers out there who've had their own personal run-ins with the H.R. Harridans, and they don't think it's an overstatement. And we've all seen the efforts to make plus-size lingerie models a thing, and we wonder less at the models and more at the agenda of the people trying to make it a thing. In short, the kind of writing that Isker puts out has traction for a reason. The real concern is not that so many...
Yeah, it has traction for a reason, partly because we no longer live in a culture where mass media is sort of ginning up and lining up all of the things we're supposed to be outraged or that we sort of agree with. Now we have social media, so it's much more fractured, and there's a world of outrage and things that we're all supposed to agree with. So, yeah, I'm not surprised if you've got people addicted to outrage cereal, give them more outrage, they'll just keep eating it. Just like if you get people addicted to nicotine, give them more cigarettes, they'll just keep smoking it.
Many people are attracted by this kind of writing. The real concern, at least to me, is that the left has been so bizarre, absurd, and demanding that the revolt, when it comes, will overshoot.
And now we're just into the left and the right and the left and the right and the left and the right. And I know a lot of people love to play that game and play away. I don't, I've got my own thoughts. I share my own thoughts openly. It's not a game I like to play just because I don't think it's that fun. And I don't think it makes me a better person.
Although Dreher thought he saw that kind of thing in this book, thankfully I did not. And I was also happy that the Jews made no appearance here, reviewing a review in the course of a review. In the course of his review
I didn't understand that line.
Of Andrew Isker's book, Rod Dreher said this, but over and over, Isker, a young Minnesota pastor who was trained by the ever-combative Douglas Wilson, undermines his case by responding with febrile intensity. Rod Dreher, reviewing the Boniface op.
And this gets to the anger piece. And again, I mean, I said it in the other video, I'll say it here. To a degree, this is the pot calling the kettle black, because Dreher can set his hair on fire as well as anyone, and Dreher's hair is all over the place. And I love Rod Dreher. I really do. I met him, I enjoy him, but there are times when I read something he writes, it's like... Now, at the same time, I wouldn't still be reading him after I started reading him before I found Jordan Peterson. And I've said before, if anybody gets credit for red pilling me, it's probably Rod Dreher. And many of the things that Dreher has written about have come true. And so this is part of the reason why I don't like playing the right-left game. I don't like playing the progressive and conservative game. But conservatives have had a pretty good track record over the last few years in terms of saying, this is a problem here and it's going to get worse. And in fact, did get worse. So I think that's a part of the reason why a lot of people like me, who are sort of more on the progressive side, have kind of said, the conservatives have been making points.
While it is possible to undermine your case with febrile intensity, and I have seen that done, I don't believe Isker is guilty of this. As Davy Crockett may have said to Jim Bowie, as they stood on the walls of the Alamo, looking out at Santa Anna's forces, the time for nuance has passed.
And again, it's just a great line. But you can use that line for anything, because it's just a great line. And that's why this guy's so good at this. Because once you hear it and you feel the feels, part of you just emotionally says, well, if the feeling is so strong, what he's connecting this to must be right. It's just how we work.
Chesterton says somewhere that we must fight because we love what is behind us, and not just because we hate what is in front of us. Well, Isker...
And another good one. I mean, he just packs them in there, just boom, 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 boom. And of course, G.K. Chesterton, lots of people are going to, of course, agree with Chesterton. But again, these are, in a lot of ways, these are Jedi pastor tricks. They really are. And pastors learn these Jedi tricks. Maybe the Jedis learned it from the pastors, because we were doing this long before George Lucas wrote about Star Wars. And it's just all sort of, and again, this isn't to necessarily undercut things, but these are just reactive things for human beings. And this guy is really, really good at it.
Spends a good bit of time emphasizing the need to cultivate a healthy sort of hatred. He also spends an extended time reinforcing Chesterton's point, an emphasis that Dreher backhanded this way, quote, "To teach your daughters to hate those enticements, you must make your household a place of deep joy. It must be a refuge from the disgusting world of filth," Isker writes. Look, I can't judge Isker's life. I can only judge what's on the page here. But there's nothing in this volume that suggests Isker's household, or anywhere really, aside from maybe his deer blind, his walk-in humidor, or his online community, is a place of deep joy. Rod Dreher, reviewing the Boniface op.
And right there, Dreher crosses a line. And with the disclaimer, again, there's nothing in this volume that suggested anything about his household, but he did cross the line, and so they're going to cross the line back. So much for turning the other cheek.
Option. However, for those who know Andrew Isker, he has to be one of the jolliest men I've ever met. And Dreher's comment that there is nothing in this volume, emphasis his, to indicate that Isker's household is a place of joy, is a comment that is wildly misplaced. There is page after page of such indications. Then Dreher says this, dragging me into it, quote, "I've noticed over the years, watching how disciples of Douglas Wilson operate rhetorically, that they typically lead with a quarrelsome overstatement and take strong negative reaction to it as a sign that they've really hit the mark with their criticism."
I think Rod is right. I'm not saying that about, as I don't know a lot of disciples of Doug Wilson, but that's definitely a pattern.
Sometimes that's true, I suppose. Rod Dreher, reviewing the Boniface option. But think for a minute. Say I set myself down to write about the California bill that is currently headed for Newsom's desk, the one that says that parents who don't affirm their child's gender status are going to get punished in custody battles. Say that I gird on my polemical sword in order to go into battle over this. How on earth would it be even possible for me to lead with overstatement? If I were to say that Sacramento has turned into an orc parliament, would that be...
I live in Sacramento. You mean the legislature? Why don't you say the California legislature? Because that's its name, instead of Sacramento. Remember the overstatement thing?
The overstatement? No, I don't think so. So what gives with the invitations? But there have been some late-breaking developments. Since that exchange, Rod Dreher, for some reason, posted this. I already commented on the fact that Dreher's review of Isker's book was far more problematic on the tone front than the Boniface option was. And then this. I don't know the details of Dreher's departure from the American Conservative, but it seems to me that he could be going through some sort of crisis or crack-up, and somebody needs to throw him a rope. It would be one...
Okay, so Dreher crossed the line, saying, I don't know, nothing in the book says he comes from a home with joy. And now, well, Dreher must be coming. Somebody needs to, again, even just the way he says it, somebody needs to throw him a rope. Just genius. I mean, you might hate the guy, but recognize and appreciate the genius. It's right there. I mean, I watch a guy like this. I watch different people. I watch Bishop Barron, and it's like, wow, I wish I could be smooth like Bishop Barron. And I watch Doug Wilson. It's like, wow, I wish I could be punchy like Doug Wilson, but I'm not going to be punchy about the same things he's punchy about.
One thing, and bad enough to lose your temper with some inconsiderate fellow travelers. But to lose your temper, F-bomb them, and then post a transcript of the proceedings online? Something is not right. After Jared Longshore extended an invitation to Rod Dreher.
Yeah, and someone sent me that tweet about something that happened in a train, and I don't know.
Repeating in essence the same kind of invitation I had offered, Stephen Wolf asked on Twitter, why on earth would we do something like that? There's an answer, and
yeah, Doug, you're being winsome.
All of it has to do with the changing of the guard. But before getting to that answer, with this kind of erratic behavior going on, could be necessary to put some limitation on what Dreher were to talk about. We have made this offer very many times over the years, and to a lot of establishment conservatives. Not one has taken us up on it. We've offered folks the same deal we offered Dreher, and we've also offered to fly me to where they were in order to meet however they were willing to meet.
Now, this is lovely. And if it worked for my schedule and they wrote me and said, Paul, come on up to Moscow, we'll give you a bed and we'll feed you tri-tip, and if I have time for it, I'd go. I'd be happy to go. I'd love to meet these people, but I'm not really sort of the high status person they're looking for. And again, I mean, these guys really do punch above their weight. I mean, if they got about 2,000 people in their two little churches and probably another network of things, and he's in the same denomination as Peter Leithart, it just blows my mind. But then again, remember what I said about the other Moscow in 1920s and 30s. So you can go and have a wonderful time. Your mileage may vary. You're not going to sort of just get the sense of it, because it's a living, breathing thing. And I am sure that it is just absolutely full of all of the complexities of human life. Some of you might remember some of the conversations that I did with, they're now in the membership section, because I do have one. By the way, it looks like Google's coughing up the $1,000 they promised me, so good on them. But living in these, and these were Benedict option communities, basically. It's going to vary, just like going to any church is going to vary. It's full of people, and people are people.
Neat. We've been willing for private meetings, no cameras or mics, and for public meetings for discussion. In the early years, this was refused because Big Eva did not want to give us any airtime. What we were teaching did not accord with the established narrative, which was that evangelicalism was destined to drift steadily left.
Now, one of the best ways to, if you just don't want to deal with something, is to not give it attention, and then you don't give it airtime. And why should this community of 2,000 some odd people, maybe they're more now, and I'm sure someone will correct it in the comment section, why should they be a concern? Now, they seem to have been a concern. I mean, they've gotten a ton of press. You just Google them and you'll find all sorts of articles. And again, from 2019, this piece by Religious News Network, hardly a bastion of conservatism, fairly, not a bad piece. Our desire is to make Moscow a Christian town. It reads, through genuine cultural engagement that provides Christian leadership in the arts and business and education and politics and in literature. Not everyone in the community is on board with that plan. So I would imagine not. It's helpful to remember that the Pacific Northwest is not the Bible Belt. The Pacific Northwest is about as unchurched a space in the United States as there is. And so to have this place there is, kind of interesting. A handbook on strategic evangelism. Jim Wilson explained that the concepts of physical warfare can be applied to strategic evangelism. According to his dad's text, Douglas Wilson said a makeover of Moscow is feasible because the city's relatively small size and reputation, and a takeover is strategic because it means a significant loss to the enemy. Now, those of you who have watched a lot of my videos might remember that I've not talked much about him, but I also did say, call me when you get to Boise. And I still stand behind that statement. Not wishing any of them ill. Scaling is important. And I think you can sort of gather a large internet community on outrage, but it's much harder to sort of live scalably on peace and shalom and goodness. The Wilsons are revered by the 1,300 people affiliated with Christ Church and loathed by many others. In both cases, because of their conservative, Reformed, evangelical, biblical teaching, Christ Church preaches that procreation is an essential part of the family. The Wilsons have 3 grown children and 17 grandchildren. The entire family gathers together for Sabbath dinner. I don't know why they call it Sabbath. I kind of do know why they call it Sabbath, but it's really Sunday. But that's Sabbatarianism, and the CRC have mentioned that in the past too. So Wilson promotes the church's belief in a direct, take no prisoners approach to preaching and writing. And again, it's kind of Mr. Potato Head angry eyes. Take no prisoners. Does that mean that they're actually doing something else? No, it means Mr. Potato Head Angry Eyes. It means we're gonna have a different posture. We're gonna sound more serious by being. And at some point, with that kind of thing, you either have to sort of put up or shut up. And if you put up, sometimes you'll wind up in jail, and not for things that are, the reason. Let's say Dr. King and his marchers wound up in jail. Sometimes you wind up in jail for things that you really should go to jail for. So that's part of the whole outrage, angry eyes stance, that it really doesn't work. Because at some point you have to ask yourself, okay, what's effective? What's effective? Well, what's your goal? What's your effective? Well, you want to change laws. Okay, how are you going to change laws? And usually when it comes to politics, now hardlinism is a strategy in politics that can be effective, but generally speaking, especially in a democracy, it's coalition building. Now, he has some very harsh words for democracy. Okay, fair enough. But what really is your alternative? Are we going back to monarchy? If so, are you going to look at Charles III? He hardly strikes me as the Christian monarch you're really looking for. I'm not saying anything about Charles III. I'm saying that, well, let's get into this. So I listen to all this stuff, and it's just drama. And then it's just like all the salient points that you can find on Daily Wire or Daily Caller. And it's just like, outrage. Okay, well, let's dial back on the outrage and ask ourselves, okay, what really is this about? And I'll go, was Michaela Peterson here? So Algo serves me up this interview with Doug Wilson on it was just a little smaller not too long ago, 3,700. So Undaunted Life, a man's podcast. I'm a man. So ladies, turn off the screen. This isn't for you. This is for men. And I suppose manly lions with manes. Hopefully not mange. So let's go.
This is Undaunted Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson.
So Spencer Clavin posted a thing on Twitter. I don't know. It was from a Southern Baptist church with dancing sharks and pirate ships and other things. And it's like, dong. What's wrong with, hi, this is Paul.
Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Doug Wilson. So he is a conservative, reformed, evangelical theologian and pastor at Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. He's written a bunch of different books. And so really the I guess scaffolding for today's conversation is his latest book called Mere Christendom. But he's also written...
I should see if that's also on, because I'm much more interested in that book than the Boniface option book. Woohoo! This is my trial subscription is just about over, and I've actually now found 2 books I want to take a look at that are on Kindle Unlimited. Wow. Isn't modernity great? Welcome to the future. All the conservatives are on it.
Future Men, Reforming Marriage, Rules for Reformers, When the Man Comes Around, and a bunch more. And Future Men is actually listed.
Look, he got the lion behind him. I wonder if he... Is that made? Did he make that out of metal? If he did, that's super cool. So props to you. Maybe Michaela will give you a call.
On our 100 books every modern Christian man should read list. That's on our website. So if you have not gotten that list yet, just go to undaunted.life/book list. But in our conversation today,
yeah, because the world needs more book lists.
Again, we used Mere Christendom for our discussion scaffolding for today. I did ask him, how do you become a theologian and a pastor? But we talked about what is mere Christianity. Or, sorry, not Mere Christianity. Here I am going all C.S. Lewis. Mere Christianity.
He does that about a dozen times during the interview.
What is that? And why name the book that way? Why kind of take that on? But really we dig into why secularism has not worked in modern society, specifically in the United States, and beyond that, why it's
now we're getting into something interesting, talking about secularism, because of course we talk about secularism a lot, and Dreher does, and I think this is actually a super interesting topic of conversation, for which Dreher and Wilson are both interesting conversation partners.
It's just flat out wicked. What a lot of people have done in the secular world is to make you believe that their worldview doesn't have.
Are you and I not in the secular world? I think YouTube's pretty darn secular world-ish.
Have religious assumptions that is actually religiously neutral. So we talk about how that's really ridiculous. We also spend time talking about.
And again, if you listen to the CRC and a lot of us Reformed stuff have long time ago gave up on this whole idea of religious neutrality.
Out what Christian leaders and Christian pastors have done to kind of aid in this, especially during the COVID lockdowns and the BLM riots, and just some of the things that were done, kind of this TED Talk churches, these at the movies approaches to everything, and how basically that doesn't lead to a deep level of gospel understanding and deep theology.
Okay, now what I noticed really quickly is that his goal is understanding and theology. So, and I think we're going to, tracking this, we're going to say, okay, deeply propositional.
And we talked about the difference between a theocracy and a theonomy. But one of the big things we talked about today is Christian nationalism, because everybody's using Christian nationalism. They're easier.
That term is just so, it's such a mess.
Either using it as a cudgel by which to, punish patriotic American Christians, and other people are using it as a badge of honor, even though they don't exactly know what it means.
And I think what he said right there, using it as a cudgel or as a badge of honor, even though they don't know what it means, I agree 100%. That's exactly right. That's why it's such a bad way to try to talk about some really important, really nuanced things.
Means, and it turns out to be more nationalist than it does Christian. We talk about civil disobedience and how that kind of works in light of Romans 13, and how people were using Romans 13 really inappropriately during the COVID lockdowns and things like that. How it is actually...
Now it's interesting, because I'm probably not going to get that far in this video, because I'm not going to go through the whole hour, but his take on... It is so, the reality is just so wild, because here a guy like Doug Wilson, he's post-millennial, but he's also very big on civil disobedience, which of course puts him kind of like over in the activist side of things, but they're not going to do this. I don't know. Maybe if the left doesn't have means, do the right have hand gestures?
A good thing to submit to God, and that would allow you to resist tyrants. We talk about modern Christian...
Wait a minute. He had a hand gesture there. I didn't see the whole thing of it, but okay.
Pastors and kind of how they build sermons, and how modern worship music and kind of that squishy worship music that's not very Psalms-like.
Oh, okay. So now we're getting sort of in my little corner of the ecclesiastical world, the TR, the truly reformed. So you've got the... because of course the Christian Reformed Church distinguished itself from the Reformed Church in America because we only sang Psalms until we had the Psalter hymnal, because some of those hymns were good, and in came the camel.
Doesn't really lead to deep theology. It doesn't serve people well.
Lead to deep theology. There it is. That's the goal. Okay, that's deep in, in many ways, these are cousins of the Christian Reformed Church in many, many ways.
But we also get into, how men and women are treated differently by pastors, and how it really doesn't set men or women up very well. And then at the very end, I asked him about all the controversies he's been in, and he's been in a lot. He's stepped in it a lot. Out of all of those, which was...
And he's been in a lot of controversies. If your game is sort of outrage, controversies are your bread and butter.
The one that was like the funniest to him, the one that he just thought was so hilarious that he was in the middle of. So I really liked his answer to that as well. I really enjoyed my time overall with Doug Wilson. So without further ado, let's get into it.
I would like to ban the word ado from YouTube, please. That's going to be my point. But hey, nice plaid shirt. I appreciate that. And look, he's got the pastor background.
Doug Wilson, welcome to Undaunted Life, a Man's podcast.
Good to be with you. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I've been wanting to have you on for a while now. You've been a very highly requested guest for the show, so we're glad we were able to take that out. But for people that are not familiar with you, we're going to find the nice, soft place to land.
If I had Doug Wilson on my channel, I really don't know what would happen. I really don't know what would happen. And I mean that in a lot of different things. I mean, I think it would just destroy some of my relationships in the CRC because you platform Doug Wilson as if my platform is bigger than his. But
you are a theologian and a pastor. So I'm assuming when you were 4 years old, playing out in the woods, that's not what you were thinking you would end up being. So what's the short version of the story of becoming a pastor and theologian?
When I was 4 years old, we didn't even have woods.
Yeah, the short version is that I was planning on being in ministry, but it would be literature ministry like my father was, running Christian bookstores in college towns. That's what I thought I was going to do.
Oh, that's interesting. Because Moscow is a college town, and I did read something about that. And, of course, they're big. I think it was Michael in the corner who said, yeah, and I hear this a lot. Yeah, Doug Wilson, I don't know, but I like the stuff they put out in terms of the homeschooling, classical stuff. So I'd be curious to hear what Richard Rowland has to say. Actually, that would be quite interesting.
So after the Navy, I was going to the University of Idaho, and a small church plant had started up. I played the guitar, so it was a Jesus People type of thing. And I played the guitar, so I was the song leader. And
he was a Christian contemporary song leader in his younger days. That's interesting.
About a year and a half into it, the man who was doing the preaching announced to everybody that he had gotten a job in another town and he was going to be gone by the next Sunday. And good luck, everybody. And I was up front with the guitar. So
when the music stopped, you needed something else. So you're it, buddy. That's the way it happens in small churches.
So I preached the next Sunday, and it was a fledgling church, just less than 2 years old, and had about 30 people in it. And so I just began preaching, but we labored hard to get someone else to come and take the pastorate, but couldn't find anybody. And the church started growing, and that's what happened.
Okay, so
and that's always just like this is like the church planter's dream story where, I was just there and it was just me and I was preaching and the church grew.
It was almost like your Cincinnatus, your George Washington moment. You were the reluctant leader of everything that was happening there. So that's very, very interesting. Well, I don't want to waste a whole lot of time today because I want to really dig into your latest book, which is this book. It's fantastic. It's called Mere Christendom. And so it's your latest work.
And it's on Kindle Unlimited. So I'm gonna download it.
You bring up really a bunch of different important and interesting topics, which could be an entire interview or an entire other book. But we're going to use this as our guide for the interview today. So to the audience, if you hate hearing me read out loud, you're going to especially hate this episode because I'm going to read a bunch of your quotes back to you to get a little bit more context. And I'll start with
Now, I do have to say that right now, what I am really getting into is The Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis, because that is a book. I've been loving that book. I have been loving that book.
This one. But if we want deliverance, we must call upon him. That's capital H, him. We must name him. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. The framework for doing this is what I am calling Mere Christendom, and hence this book. So just generically, 30,000-foot view, why did you write this book? What chord are you trying to strike with it? And then if you could, define Mere Christendom for us.
Sure. What I'm trying to communicate to Christians is that the secular experiment has failed.
Okay, and right there, when I got to this point in it, I thought, I'm into this conversation. I'm into it because the secular experiment has failed, and failed is always a judgment call. I don't know that it's failed, but I think it is something that is well worth exploring, and that is something that Wilson is going to get into here, that Dreher has been thinking about, and that I've been thinking about a lot. You might remember I well, shoot, I'm going to have to think about the order I release these videos in. I've been stacking them up in the membership section, in the no wait, no ads section. And because I was having this conversation on CRC Voices, and you know, my huge disappointment with the Dumais book was the story isn't about conservative Christians who love their country and their Christianity and their patriotism sort of come together. Remember, politics is cents and religion is dollars. Religion is always, politics is now. The real change that has happened in the country has been this change. I read a little bit from the American Malvern, which was in 1942, in March of 1942, the super Protestants got together and sort of made their blueprint for the entire planet. And when you read it, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I recognize that. That's this. You know, free trade, open borders, unfettered immigration. And so if you read a lot in that time period of the 40s, you know, FDR was super into this. They wanted to, you know, begin to include the Catholics and the Jews in this great American experiment, because the Protestants were, the mainline church was so dominant. And so the way they did it was basically, as Wilson's pointing to, you sort of smooth over all of the naughty, crunchy religious stuff, and, you know, like Jesus and things, and you just make it about values. But the values were the values of the American church from the Civil War on through the 19th century progressive era. And so as you listen to him, it's really important to try to just up your resolution on American history a little bit more, because again, my thesis has been that secularism was sort of like when they take if the virus is Christianity, then secularism was in some ways the vaccine. And what it did for some was it inoculated them against Christianity, the stronger strain, by giving them sort of a weaker strain. So the virus was like, you know, like a 19th century smallpox vaccine. Give them a little bit of the virus with secularity. And then secularity becomes sort of this mass template by which all sorts of other nations can do things together. Now, it was a tremendously sneaky way to introduce Christian values all over the world, even in places that weren't Christian at all. And I think it's for that reason why you saw the rise of militant Islam in the 20th century, because it began to dawn on people that, hey, wait a minute, all of this open stuff that the super Protestants were promoting in the middle of the 20th century that got sort of promoted throughout the world through the United Nations and the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, that's Christianity. But it's, you take Jesus out of it and you just make again, Bella wrote about civil religion. And so this civil religion kind of goes around the world, and it was actually extremely successful, and it benefited the United States and the Western world a lot, and is a big part of the reason why people from all over the world, Africa and Asia, Latin America, still want to get into the US, Canada, Germany, into old Christendom. Although you would have to argue Latin America is part of Christendom, but not a very successful part. So what Wilson wants to do is paint a very black and white story. And in order to make sort of outrage Oreos work, you need to paint a black and white story. You need to have the white frosting and the black cookie, and it's got to be stark. And the story just isn't that stark.
Okay. The idea that we can govern ourselves without reference to the transcendental reality that is
and what's amazing is that in that phrase, without reference to the transcendental reality, why didn't you just say the Christian God? the transcendental reality, you're already making a secularish move in there by we're going to talk about the holy or the sacred or the transcendent. I mean, all these sort of philosophical word options so that we don't have to say the Lord from the Bible. But then he takes that move, which is interesting.
God is a pipe dream. So after World War II,
Now, let's, because, he makes some correct points here.
when the classical liberals, meaning secular liberals, said, well, we can have a decent, orderly society without reference to God. We don't have to name Jesus. We don't have to be explicitly Christian to have all the values that we hold dear as Americans. I would say, okay, how's it going?
It depends a lot on who you are. Because, I mean, before the Second World War, Jim Crow was a real problem. So let's not forget that. And I can't forget that because I've grown up mostly in African American. I've lived most of my life in African American communities, and even desegregation. And nobody's lamenting the loss of Jim Crow. The story, even that story, is more complex because the African American family has had a bad time of it. And for those of you who don't listen to me often, I mean, two of my favorite guys to listen to on that are Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter, even though neither of them, you're these two African-American intellectuals, neither of them go to church. And Greg Lowry's, did I say Jim Lowry? Greg Lowry's story with the church is a fascinating one. Can't wait until his memoir comes out. Really looking forward to that. John McWhorter. So, yeah, but this in some ways, this is sort of a version of the subtraction story that Charles Taylor talks about, where it's just all lost since then. And one of the inconvenient truths of this is that church attendance reaches its peak in the United States after the Second World War in the 50s and 60s. And then the baby boomers sort of, rode that many people went to church. Church attendance reached its peak then. And so you had more and more people who talked about Jesus, and whether they're in mainline or in evangelical or fundamentalist churches. So again, he sort of pulls this thing out as sort of this low resolution subtraction story. And it's like, why are you telling a subtraction story like that?
Look around. We're chopping babies up into pieces. We have drag queens twerking for little kids. We have same-sex marriage authorized by the highest court in the land. So apparently, it is not possible for Americans to govern themselves without reference to transcendental truth. We're screwing it up.
Okay, so things are bad. Therefore what? What are you going to do? I mean, it's Jordan Peterson's question to Bill Maher when Jordan Peterson was on Bill Maher, and the people over on the progressive side of things are sort of yucking it up, laughing it up at the idiots who voted for Trump. And Maher and Jordan Peterson basically says, what are you going to do with the other half of the country? And especially if you're Christian, you have to say, oh yeah, they're image bearers too. Remember that. There might be some possession involved, but an exorcism is required, not a bloodbath.
And so what I want to press upon Christians is that we have to return to Christ. The alternative is stark. It's Christ or chaos.
Again, black, white. Oh, okay. But again, remember, as a percentage, more people went to church in the 1950s and 60s than in the 1850s and 60s, or in the 1750s and 60s. America has long been a country that's been deeply Christian, deeply Protestant by the shape of immigration, but a lot of people didn't go to church. Now, again, this is a really complex thing because in many ways, there were a lot of Christian values that were in the culture, but at the same time, just read the history of abortion. It's a lot more complex than that. I mean, it was the American Medical Association that stopped abortion, because before the AMA sort of stepped in, abortion was kind of a folk medicine that people would do before quickening. And prostitution was legal. We're out here in the West. I have some people in my church that remember when there were brothels in downtown Sacramento. There are still legal brothels in Vegas, or not Vegas, but in Nevada. So, again, this is just sort of a subtraction story. Things used to be better. Oh, okay. Things used to be better. It's about as broad as you can get.
Okay.
Okay.
And we're currently in the midst of chaos. Now, mere Christendom.
And, I lived overseas. I lived with a lot more chaos than I live with here in Sacramento. Now, it's different. And I think one of the things that we do have to, and I think the conservatives make really strong points on, is sort of the invasiveness of government and that sort of power. And of course, COVID was a piece of that. But let's turn all the way around here and say, okay, so you want to make abortion illegal. Would you be happy if abortion just sort of became women's folk medicine again? Because there's no putting that genie back in the bottle, because we know a lot more about biology and a lot more about reproduction. So if abortion just basically becomes folk medicine again, or are you going to be somehow using AI and Google to, well, if a woman sort of, Google signs of pregnancy, are you going to put some AI bot to make sure that this woman doesn't use said folk medicine to induce a natural abortion early in the term? So this, again, it's really easy to sort of get all outragey and all this stuff, but when it comes to application, a big part of this is because of the rise of technology and our power. And again, go back to the Peugeot-Roland conversation about how governments have so many more tools to get into the details of our lives.
Is sort of a zoom out take on Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism, which was addressed by Stephen Wolfe's book and other folks, is simply talking about one country. So, for example, Zambia is ostensibly...
And I've talked about Christian nationalism plenty on this. Why are there Gothic-style cathedrals in the middle of Duke University and Wells? Why is there a cathedral in the middle of Wellesley College? I mean, talk about a woke liberal place, Wellesley College in Boston, Mass. Why is there a church in the middle of that? Well, because Christian nationalism, because America's been doing this for a very long time.
Possibly a Christian nation. It's formally a Christian nation. Great Britain is a Christian nation. There's Church of England. So you can have one church.
And way more people go to church in America than England.
You can have one nation that is formally Christian. But what happens when you zoom out and you have multiple nations that are naming the name of Christ? That's Christendom.
Fair enough. And so, good title for a book. And now that it's on Kindle Unlimited, I'll page through it and think what I think about it. But okay, but what does that look like? And there many people go many different ways on this. Can a nation be Christian, et cetera, et cetera. The payoff is going to be and again, I would argue that the current culture war is a Christendom civil war. What's really at battle is what on earth does it mean to be a Christian? And in many ways, we are still sort of working through the progressive vision that you can find in the American Malvern versus other positions within Christianity. And again, it's not just two, because of the Catholics have their own wrinkle on this, and now the Orthodox are coming on the scene, and you've got this mass group of people that are nominal. And I just caught a little bit on Twitter from James Wood and others who are talking about this book of Dechurching, and then so I mean this is a live conversation in terms of, okay, so people have stopped saying Jesus. And every minister in church worth their salt will regularly tell the congregation, yeah, you could say, Lord, Lord, Lord. You just lift that from the New Testament. And Jesus says, depart from me, I never knew you. So just putting Jesus on stuff, really? That's the plan? No, that's not the plan. I don't want to strawman them, but
So, all
So
right.
that's kind of what we're moving towards, or we'd like to.
That's the goal that I would like to move towards. So think Christian nationalism, one nation at a time. But let's say in the medieval period, when you had all of Europe was Christian, but you had different nations.
Roman Catholic.
Those nations collectively were Christendom. Individually, those nations or tribes were Christian tribes or Christian nations.
Okay.
So that's, but again, okay, but it's not really an Amish thing because you're on YouTube. So
So we're going to dig way more into Christian nationalism here in a second, because that's kind of a buzz term that a lot of people use, and
and buzzwords are holy words.
they use it as, some people use it as a cudgel, some people use it as a badge of honor, and I think they're all using it improperly. But I'm going to go back to something that you said. I'm already blowing up on my own interview, but you talked about classical liberalism. I feel like a lot of conservatives, Doug, have been almost romanced by this idea of, oh, this guy's just a classical liberal. And it's like,
I think this guy running this channel, I think he does a really great job in this interview. I really do.
oh, that's okay. Like, yes, it's not like a blue-haired, nose-ringed leftist, but they're just a
And it's also funny because blue-haired used to be old ladies.
classical liberal. And we're thinking of that in terms of being it positive. But you have several quotes in your book about the Darwinian society that we live in, where the highest civic, I think the way you said it is, the highest civic value has to be survival. And you don't just say secularism is bad or unfortunate, you say that it's wicked. So I feel like classical liberalism and
See, I'm very interested in the secular conversation because I think if you're really going to evaluate secularism, you have to look at both sides of the ledger. And I think secularism is, I've said this before, it's the secret sister of the church. And instead of being a part of a living, breathing community, I read that piece from The Atlantic with Ryan Burge, who was talking about the fact that Christians who leave the church actually become less nuanced in their political views, because what the practice of being in church does, I think, is afford better conversations between people.
the wickedness of secularism is all tied in together, no?
Right. Yes. So I want to make a careful distinction, however. I have no problem at all with free markets, let's say.
Sure.
I think free markets are a Christian construct, but I believe that we have to admit that they're a Christian construct. I don't want an invisible hand.
That's a really free markets are a Christian. Secularism is evil, but free markets are a Christian construct. Color me dubious.
Unless it's the hand of the Lord Jesus, I don't want to turn everything over to an invisible hand who's going to govern things. Who knows
Again, he's a meme lord. I mean, it's very clever what he did there.
how or why. I believe that if someone proposes a Christian classical liberal order, I'm okay. But if someone wants a secular Enlightenment classical liberal order, I think there's death in the pot.
It'd be super interesting listening to him talk to some Orthodox people. That would be fascinating.
Okay, fair.
Because there are some ways in which. So is for those of you who don't know what we're talking about with this post-millennialism. Post-millennialism was sort of the dominant. There's amillennial, premillennial, post-millennial. It has to do a lot with the rise of dispensationalism. There's a very Al Mohler, again, algorithms churned it up. It's something, again, on the watch list. Very interesting conversation about a book, The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism. That really caught my interest because dispensationalism has had a deep impact on American evangelicalism. But postmillennialism was the dominant paradigm at the end of the Civil War, and sort of went all the way through until the First World War, where it kind of died a death in the trenches of First World War. The idea was that gradual improvement. And so in some ways, to find a postmillennial is sort of like finding a veteran of the First World War who's still out there fighting. And if you want to get a sense of postmillennialism, listen to something like the Battle Hymn of the Republic, where the Union soldiers were, bringing the justice of God to the rebels and going to crush it. Now, again, when you see that, there's so many interesting sort of cross currents and cross pressures with these narratives. So then to find these theonomist post-millennials, it just kind of fascinates me, because now they're optimistic. And frankly, it sort of reminds me a little bit of Jacob and his messianic streak, although maybe Doug Wilson is the Messiah you're looking for. I don't know.
Fair enough. I appreciate that distinction. To take the point even a little bit further, Doug, well, I'll read this short quote, and I think this will lead us into a further discussion. But here's the quote. One of the central tactics of our regnant secularism is to pretend that their foundational assumptions are religiously neutral and that we need not look at them. So something that
and this is the point about secularism. The brand of secularism that got promoted by the United Nations, that was sort of launched by the waspy mainline Protestants that sort of went out into the world through American institutions. You have some deeply Christian ideas that go out that way, and you've got some other ideas that are open to and in need of some exploration and critique and even criticism. So again, this whole culture war is a Christendom civil war. It always has been.
I feel like has been a bit of a groundswell over the last several years is people realizing that leftism, communism, socialism, whatever ism, Black Lives Matterism, whatever, these are not religiously neutral. Like, they have their saint.
Should listen to the rest is history treatment of communism. Communism also. You would not have communism in the world if you didn't have Christianity. There is some Christian DNA in communism. Now, I'm not promoting it. It's clearly a failed project, and there was some deep rebellion and deeply non-Christian things in there too. But this dramatic vision of equality, again, listen to the rest is history on communism. It's a very interesting story.
They have their sacred texts. They have, their catechisms. They have all of those things. Mm-hmm. I guess it's not as ubiquitous as I would like it to be, that thought process. But talk to me a little bit more about how we're supposed to pretend that this regular old secularism is not religious.
Yeah, basically on.
And this was taught to me when I was in Reformed doctrine class in my Christian junior high. All life is religious. Everyone has a religious system. Your religious system is basically your operating system for making life work in the world, your value system, all of those things.
On this, over the last few years, the liberals have really helped us out by not only they've transformed themselves from sort of let's pretend to be neutral and calm and collected and you religious types are the crazy ones.
And in some ways, he's making exactly the point of that clip from Tim Keller that I've played a number of times, that we've gone from, we've gone towards programmatic secularism.
When you look at how they deified George Floyd in the Floyd riots, well, that's saint worship. that there, I wouldn't
Jonathan Peugeot made the same point.
be surprised to see them leaving baskets of fruit and lighted candles in front of the portraits of.
Because your politics has become your religion. And what's interesting is that recognition, of course, Jordan Peterson's made it, Ryan Burge made it in that piece. Almost everybody now is beginning to recognize that religion is not just sort of a little corner that secularism sort of pushes away. And this is why, with the recession of modernity, you're also having the recession of secularism, and why the Hagia Sophia is going from a museum to a mosque, why India is becoming more and more Hindu, even, talks about renaming it, the rise in Islam. We are nearing the end of this secular age. And in fact, the interest by Rod Dreher in Hungary, these are all signs of the end of the secular age. Now, the question is going to be, how do we deal with pluralism, and on what terms? So we're back to the end of the 30 Years' War. We're back to the Peace of Westphalia. We're back to trying to figure out, okay, once we recognize that we have vastly different understructures beneath our value systems, and that these religious figures actually mean something. If you follow Jesus, it's not the same as if you follow Muhammad. It's not the same if you follow Buddha. Sure, you can find similarities in language and customs and people, partly because secularism was an enormous amount of Jesus smuggling that went on during secularism. And if you look at the kind of non-Christian religions that are sort of afforded space in America today, in many ways, they all need to have had an injection of Christian values, these WASPy United Nations, mid-20th century Christian values in, and then your Islam is okay. And then your Hinduism is okay. And then your Buddhism is okay. And this is exactly what many people from these other religions are reacting against.
George Floyd. And then the climate change hysteria it's a cult. It's a cult-like thing. And given how unsupported it is by the science, it's frankly a cargo cult.
What's amazing too about Wilson is that for as much as he's a theonomist reactionary, he's still deeply modernist, and that's part of where, with the recession of modernity, you find some moderns who are. This is the point that Dr. Jim made to me when he watched New Atheism in its heyday. It's sort of like Mono Lake on the other side of Yosemite. And you go out there and there's all these tufa formations. And it's like, wow, these things sticking up out of the water. How did that happen? Well, the lake level used to be a lot higher. And then you couldn't see them because they were just forming under the water. And then they start pulling water out of the streams that are contributing to Mono Lake because it's a dead lake. And the levels go down, and now suddenly you can see them. And that is part of what's going on here, just like the New Atheist. With modernity receding, you have sort of a militant modernist resurgency, and in this case, a militant modernist Christian resurgence, but it's a modernist Christian resurgence. And so, it's the science.
It's just like a religious frenzy. And I don't know how to account for the behavior of multiple grown-ups in this, in the COVID panic, COVID lockdown. All of this amounts to a religious hysteria, not only religious, but religious hysterics. And that has sort of displayed to Christians the religious nature of what they've been selling us for the previous decades.
sharper than that, it's displayed the recession of secularism that increasingly, as Reformed Christians have been saying for a long time, all of life is religious. Now it's just, we're seeing that you cannot have a human being that is not living with a religious system. Religion is our operating system.
The mask,
I think
the
that's
mask
right.
came off.
Yeah, I would certainly say that it's funny you even use the term grown-ups, and I had to hold back a chuckle because it's like when you see these people acting out in the ways
Grown-ups are just big children that have been a little bit better socialized, but push them in some ways and they'll become like children again.
that they do, like
Right.
it's not even just about etiquette, because right, yeah, is it showing high etiquette to scream at somebody while they're having dinner? No, of course not. But
No.
it's childish behavior that comes from a worldview that is devoid of any type of judgment and any type of standards. But we don't want to get too far off into that.
No, they do have judgment and they do have standards. They're just different.
I teed it up just a second ago, but let's talk more about Christian nationalism. So,
Sure.
because people misdefine it so much, I know you've already kind of defined it already. Let's define it again, but talk about how it's used. So, I talked about how leftists will use Christian nationalism as, okay, if you don't support the BLM riots and if you don't wear a mask, then you're a Christian nationalist somehow. Or if you're basically just a proud American that also goes to church, you're a Christian nationalist, and that's bad. But then on the other side, you have Christians and conservatives that want to wear that badge proudly, but I guess they're going a little bit farther overboard to the nationalism side and forgetting the Christian part. But
Right.
it's used as a cudgel against patriotic Americans, and it's used as a cudgel against just normal people. So let's have a deeper discussion about Christian nationalism.
Sure. I'm not wanting to try a novel experiment of making America Christian. What I want to do is make America Christian again. Okay.
Right.
So this is not
Make America Christian again. Okay, let's go back to Richmond, north of Richmond, meet John Doe. Go back to Frank Capra. Go back to George Bailey on that bridge praying, I'm not a praying man. Again, remember, on a percentage basis, American church attendance reached its peak after the Second World War. Partly because in God we trust, the country sort of mobilized to fight the Cold War, and the way to define the communists were that they were godless. Now, a lot of Europeans were getting godless fast too, and they were our allies. And then when the Iron Curtain comes down, suddenly, oh yeah, there's this whole Eastern church that's out there that we really didn't pay much attention to because they were on the other side of the Iron Curtain. So it's nice to say, make America Christian again, but America is a very different country than it was 75, 100 years ago. It's a very different country. All the technological change that has happened over the last 100 years, the rise of radio, of television, of the internet, which has exposed all sorts of things. People from all over the world. Now, again, it's a little different in the United States than Europe because a lot of the people coming here are from Catholic countries. And so in many respects, America has Christians coming over its southern border. And if you watch places like the politics of, let's say, a state like California, things could change because everybody just imagines that all the people of color are just going to always vote for the Democrats. And, well, a lot of those people of color are Christians and Catholics or evangelicals who have come across. And so it's a vastly larger, more complex nation. And on one hand, the answer to pluralism is Christianity. There's a tremendous amount of pluralism within Christianity, and in many ways, the whole point of a movement like evangelicalism has been to try to bring unity out of the pluralism within Christianity. And this is going to be especially difficult when, on one hand, you're sort of a really tightly confessional group, and you're going to have to figure out how then to get along with these other groups that are nowhere near within your confession. In other words, where exactly are you going to be fighting? Is your main concern the church, or is your main concern the political realm? And there's an irony here that with as Americans, as the nuns, the number of nuns have risen, and people have stopped going to church, politics becomes their religion. What are you going to say to religious leaders for whom their overriding concern is the political concern? Haven't they simply joined all of those other people for whom politics is your religion? Now, you have church too, but your main concern is political. And he complains about the leftward creep of evangelicalism. Well, part of what happened to the main line is, in fact, they abandoned their churches and politics became their religion. And so I fully expect that the vast majority of from Doug Wilson and his church plant, if, between 2019, maybe there are more than that now, I don't know. But we always hear them on the political realm. That's where they're sharpest. That's where their audience is the greatest. You do hear them sometimes in some of Christian YouTube, fighting some of these these internal squabbles. So we're gonna have the Amils, the Reformed Amils like myself, versus the Reformed Post-mills like these theonomists. So there are a lot of really difficult double binds in this situation, where if you want to be known as a Christian minister for your political moves, has the politics become your religion? Is that your area of ultimate concern? And how exactly does that then work? And for as crafty as he is and as sharp as he is, once I hear him talking more, I don't find that same brilliance and cleverness in terms of the creativity of the program he is offering. And maybe that's why, for the most part, it's outrage serial on YouTube. And, if you've got 44,000 subs, and in many ways your YouTube clout, if I search, there's way, way, way more stories written about Doug Wilson than there are written about me. Now, he's been around doing this for far longer than I have. But part of me wonders, and again, I've got people that are using the homeschool, the classic stuff, and they say, yeah, this classic stuff is good. But you really haven't taken over Moscow, never mind Boise. What's the population of Moscow, Idaho? Total population 2020 census, 25,000 people. And what do you have, 2,500? You have 10% of the town, and this is your focus, and this is your focus after so long. Now, someone could point to me and say, Vanderclay, you're pastoring a dying church. Who are you to point fingers? Fair enough. Fair enough. But I'm not the one looking to make America Christian again in the way that he is. So, yeah, you punch well above your weight, granted. But when we really start to, say, dig into what exactly your plan is, I don't know that it's much different from other conservative evangelicals, except you're not dispensational, and you have sort of this really strange post-millennial theonomist vibe. And okay, hey, this is America. This liberal, secular place has afforded you the freedom to pursue this and to move into Moscow, Idaho, and to buy houses and to have a church building and to have 2 churches. And so, God bless you. But I don't know that this is, again, the more I hear you talk, the less I think, oh, you have something to offer that's really going to sort of set the world on fire, especially for a post-mill. I don't know. So again, I think that about does it for now with respect to this. I live in Sacramento. It's a political town. I know enough people that work in politics because I live in Sacramento and it's a political town. And I have a sense of what it actually takes to change legislation and to elect candidates and. You know, really, if you probably shouldn't have stayed in Moscow, you probably should have gone to Boise. And Boise is an interesting place. Boise is one of these towns that, you know, up until recently has just been booming with a lot of people moving out of California. Boise's been a destination. Boise is a hip, cool place to live. Boise is a place that a lot of church planters want to go to plant churches because when people move, they're usually open to religious conversion, just like they're changing other things and they're making new friends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why didn't you go to Boise? I mean, when you went to Moscow, didn't you sort of paint yourself into a corner? I mean, thank goodness for the internet, because at least you can have some internet fame. And yeah, again, they've made a name for themselves in a number of remarkable ways. It's also interesting to me that he hasn't made his way onto Jordan Peterson's podcast yet. I would, because he says a lot of very affirming things of Jordan Peterson. He really likes Jordan Peterson. But it's made his way on the podcast. I don't know if Jordan just doesn't know about him. I can't imagine that, because, you know, Jordan follows this stuff pretty closely. So I don't know. So, you know, some people are horrified that I'm talking about Doug Wilson. I talk about a lot of stuff. But yeah, so again, sort of my path. I listened to him talk to Dreher, and then I thought, I want to know more about him. And now that his book is on Kindle Unlimited, I'll probably take a little perusal through. But the deeper I look in it, the less interesting and unique and sort of the more, I mean, these are sort of tropes that, oh, America used to be way more Christian. Yeah, in some ways it was. In other ways, most of us wouldn't want to go back to some of those other ways either. And we wouldn't want our friends going back there. So, and the world is just a lot different. So, anyway, so that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. I think some of you are going to have opinions. Can't imagine why I would think that, because I do read the comments. So we'll see what your opinions are, because I'm sure you'll share them.